Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm running this episode solo, so it is me, Mark Cashman, getting right to the point. On today's episode, we chat with Drew Madelung, who expertly focuses on all things OneDrive, specifically all the deep diving details admin needs to know about all things OneDrive. I grabbed time with Drew recently at the 365 EduCon show in Chicago. You may now know this going forward as TechCon 365, mainly to see what he was up to ask him a few questions, and maybe some questions you might also be interested in hearing what he has to say in his answers, especially when it comes to deployment of OneDrive, configuration of the sync client at scale, troubleshooting, and the ever-important training and governance. Drew covers it all, and he best addresses what is exactly on the minds of OneDrive admins. So you're going to hear it. I also thought it was really important to consider as you're thinking about and hearing what Drew has to say about OneDrive is this a time where you and your company are moving from a competitor, a cloud-based file service? There's, of course, a number of good competitors out there. We have a really great resource, hint, to move away from them. We acquired a company called Mover. It's now a part of our migration service within the admin center, hint. But maybe you're looking at reviewing what it is that you are using and maybe what it is that you want to take advantage of in Microsoft 365. Of course, there's a lot of competitive analysis and compete materials, and you really should look at it as a larger project, certainly to move from one cloud provider to the other. But consider if you're already taking advantage of other parts of Microsoft 365, OneDrive is a great complement to how you store your files, how you share files, how you sync them to your various devices. And of course, some of the benefits that you get with a lot of the integration and some of the core work that the OneDrive team does that benefits SharePoint, that benefits Teams, that benefits wherever it is that you're accessing, sharing, or working with a file. Behind that certainly is the deploying yourself into a good state. The sync client has made leaps and bounds over the years. Long gone are the days of groove.exe. And really here are the days where sync is very accurate, fast, easy to deploy. A lot of the things that you can do to help get your device and devices in a better state to be able to use some of those capabilities like the known folder move. You'll hear Drew talk about that. But all the bells and whistles that you can from an admin perspective enable so that there are great features for your end users to save them time hunting and looking for files, to be able to get right back to the work that they were working on, and to share effectively. Remember, no more emailing attachments. It's all about emailing links and sharing, sometimes not even in an email, just grabbing a good link and posting it into the chat. So some of that is based in good training. There is keeping the pace, of course, with a lot of the innovation in the user interface so that if you're an admin on behalf of your users, you'll be able to then train them on what's new. Also, to be able to train them in your own vernacular of how we share files at X company or enterprise or institution. It's your company. You certainly might have a very distinct files policy document or site in terms of the training or some of the ways that we do and don't do. That might be specific to using SharePoint and OneDrive and where you put files and how you delineate maybe the movement of files and the life cycle of the file. Certainly, sync becomes a big factor in terms of the benefits and the difference. There's the new feature, add to OneDrive versus syncing from everywhere. We have a great episode on that in the past if you're looking for a great answer, but hint, it's the future, add to OneDrive, and I've been using it for a while. It's a great feature, and it's something that you would hear somebody like Drew consult you on to be able to put yourself and your entire company in the right state of using OneDrive to the best of its ability, to the best of your benefits in using a cloud service. On top of all this, there's always the extra bonus points for establishing a governance plan, which if you've never been in the position of establishing or maintaining a governance plan, it might just be, all right, I'll wait till Mark stops talking about governance plans because it sounds whatever it sounds like if you're not interested in it. But I will tell you, especially for the where you put files, who has access, and how do you track and report all of that, And of course, if you enable guests and use shared locations as intended versus randomly sharing in places that maybe you're not aware of and catching it a little bit too much after the fact. And also back to that known folder move, establishing that from the get-go when people in your company first onboard into Microsoft 365, start leveraging OneDrive. You want to have that governance plan in place before anybody uses it. That's optimal. But even if not, to be able to establish good practices going forward, it's big part of it is writing it down, being aware of what's going on. You will hear a lot of things from Drew today. Take those as things for you to consider further to either take advantage of or bake into your governance plan going forward. The main thing, of course, is more content in the cloud is going to also be really great for security and compliance. Fewer things on C drives or well synced with OneDrive so you can at least manage those files in that device. There's a lot, and there's certainly a lot that the team listens to in terms of feedback, and there are things that we want to encourage that you try, especially if you're new to OneDrive. There's always a couple of great tips or tricks that I've heard my colleagues and MVPs in the community as feedback. One of them is absolutely as part of your deployment plan, get the OneDrive mobile app out into people's hands. It's a really easy way for people to just quickly open up an app on their phone and shoot off a file based on somebody's request. Or you can mark up PDFs if that's something that comes in handy. Open it up, ink it with the new tools that are within the OneDrive mobile app. Or take a picture of a document and again, ink up the document, same as when you're inking a PDF. The inking is something, if you haven't tried it, I would highly encourage trying it. It is very functional and very easy to use. There's the other thing that you will hear from Drew, and certainly there's a lot of documentation on just purely scripting your onboarding experience, how you take change requests, prepping for when they leave the company, what is your policy? What is the steps that you'll follow? We have a lot of tech to support you around retention and delegation for that recovery and any custom reporting that you need. There are some default reports, but also things that you can customize because the majority of OneDrive admin capabilities are baked in, but they're also for you to then take advantage of. And the last note here as a hint, don't forget, a lot of the OneDrive Admin Center capabilities are now baked into the SharePoint Admin Center within Microsoft 365. So you can have that delegation. You can delegate down into the granular areas that you want. And of course, SharePoint and OneDrive share a lot of common platform capabilities. And to the end user, hopefully that common capability flows through as well. Now, Drew, as you hear, is all about how to think about managing OneDrive to the fullest of your organization, how to make it better, how to optimize using what you have, and investing in the right places so you can keep up with the times. You will see he is your trusted advisor for all things OneDrive in overdrive at your disposal and within your control. So let us put us in gear and OneDrive our way into the interview with Drew. Mr. Drew Madelung. We are here at the 365 EduCon conference. We're going to take an exhale. You've been presenting, you've been meeting people at the booth, you've been doing a whole bunch of stuff. So let's take it from the persona of somebody who comes to the booth and you introduce yourself. I'm Drew Madelung. How do you describe who Drew is and what Drew does?
Thanks, Mark. So I like to describe, if someone comes up and describes who I am, I've been a long time Microsoft consultant. I've been helping organizations deploy Microsoft for a really long time since back in the BPOS days. But my world is, I come from an IT pro background. I was a server administrator, a network administrator. My world was working in that server world, and I've transitioned to the cloud. And I love to think of how things work. How does Microsoft 365 work on the back end? Why does it work that way? And really focus on that why and dive into the tech side of that. And that's really what I do for my work life. But on the side, I'm a proud dad of 2 little girls. We're in Chicago this week. I'm up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I used to travel a lot for work, but now I'm home a little bit more, which is thankful. So I do a lot of time with family, a lot of time outside. I'm a large golfer and sports fan, so I enjoy my work of diving into the tech space and working at 365, but also really enjoy my time on the side outside of the tech space.
So it sounded like from your work description, I've qualified you in my head as, of course, a OneDrive expert. And most of the things I was hoping to talk to you about were around OneDrive from an administrator's perspective. So if I were to be a OneDrive administrator, handed the keys as a delegate from the tenant level admin, and now I'm the OneDrive admin, what are some of the things that I just need to know as far as the state of OneDrive these days? And maybe we'll get specific about a couple of features or areas of OneDrive, but just broadly speaking.
Yeah, so I've been working with a lot of different organizations in helping deploy and manage OneDrive. So kind of some background to make sure I set that is, even in the last year, I've done 3 projects with organizations to manage and deploy OneDrive. I've actually been working within the OneDrive state for a long time. I was actually one of the mode members for Microsoft OneDrive Expert back in many years ago. So
that's not an acronym you hear much later.
I still have a little badge somewhere that says I was a mode expert. But where I see things today from an admin's point of view, if they're given it, is there's a lack of understanding on all of the ways that OneDrive can be managed. And there's a very big set it and forget it mindset with the way that OneDrive is deployed or enabled, that it's not wrong, but you could do it better by saying OneDrive is deployed by just turning it on and allowing people to upload their personal content. The state is there's more, right? There's ways to improve the employee experience through OneDrive. I think there's a lack of, not just understanding, but awareness of how powerful OneDrive can be, especially on the web. And there's not enough internal communication to promote or continuously adopt OneDrive as they go. So if you're handed the keys, you first you'll know that it's on or off. That's a pretty clear understanding, but you need to start looking at what else you can do to both enhance the experience and really start to put in policies in place to control things the way that you want. So some of the first things I see are just lack of sync client deployment effectively, or lack of awareness of the devices where people are accessing it. We live in a multi-device world, and people think that everyone's on Windows, and that's entirely not true. So how do you ensure our mobile devices are controlled through OneDrive? How do you ensure Mac, which is great, is controlled in a similar way and maintained? So if people have issues on Mac and there's a sync failure, how do we know about that? How do we help ensure, as you, the administrator, to triage that or find out how to improve it? It could be a client issue, a desktop issue, it could be a file issue. There's just more to do than just enabling it. So if I'm the admin, I think of what's next. What are the different options I have to grow this as a solution in my org?
That can be kind of like you said, not a set it and forget it mindset, because the thing you got me thinking about was change management. And there are going to be either new features that Microsoft releases or new capabilities that maybe were available and the company decided to turn on that feature. Or it could just be, you know what, our bring your own device policy is now expanded to more types of devices and multiple devices for individuals. And to be able to set it and forget it for a little bit is great, but to miss out on opportunities to ensure people are trained in the right way. Some of the, I think, a great role that OneDrive admins play is how do you use OneDrive? And maybe you may or may not be in charge of that, but it's an important part that, you know, if a new feature comes out like Copilot in OneDrive, when that comes, how to use that? That's not really a difference of how you deploy it, but it's definitely a difference of how you use it.
I really think a big one there, one that is really top of mind for me for an admin point of view, is the add to OneDrive feature. I think that is one that has been unused, untapped potential, I would say, that if you're an administrator, how do you get people to start to use that more? And it might not be your direct role to do that, but the more people that do use add to OneDrive versus establishing a whole another sync on that library, it reduces the load on those machines that you'd be managing. It improves it has less storage need that you kind of move across on those devices. So inherently might not be in charge of it, but if people would use like Add to OneDrive or your example, start to use Copilot, you need to know what are the ramifications of that. And do I need to do anything as an administrator to ensure that they can be successful or there won't be an issue when we enable things like Copilot or Add to OneDrive, or another one a big one is request files, right? That's actually a peer technology change that you have to make for external sharing, which can be very challenging to set up, but that's a OneDrive feature, again, that's not used effectively. That's not a set it and forget it. You might not come back and say, how do I use that to OneDrive? How do I turn on request files? Like those are areas that get lost through time.
So if we were to use that example of external sharing and just maybe drill into that, there are always with that type of feature concerns about using it. What does that do to expose our content, or how can we manage it if it feels like I'm exposing it to new people, external folks? If you see that as a theme, and there's probably others, but to just drill into a little bit of external sharing, how would you qualify how you share information about external sharing that makes it received well? And of course, on top of that, if people have concerns, how do you combat those and share the information that you know?
So OneDrive as a solution is, I believe, the key to start your external sharing journey. I think that where I see this coming from is especially when you look at other solutions that work with personal file share management. I like to start external sharing setup with, how are people sharing content today? And 99% of the time it's email, which means that when you email that file, you actually lose control of that file once it's gone. So the external sharing capability in OneDrive is a gateway to enabling better control through that external sharing in OneDrive. And I think an interesting way to look at it is that will be other solutions that are doing personal file share management today in your org. There's got to be some way they're sharing their content. And I've even seen it where they have a product that they're using to share files, and then they say they won't use OneDrive to share files, even though it's like the same thing. And
is that where you grab them by the shoulders and say, "What are you doing?"
You need to spend time to understand how you can control the files. So at an event like this, there's some great conversations that we have, both with people here and then in customers that I work with, of how to properly enable external sharing. I think the starting point is it's a journey, and depending on your industry, you will have some requirements that you will need to meet, primarily around some data loss prevention options and some classification options. Those are okay. Where I see a biggest pain point with external sharing and OneDrive, and just this is paralysis by analysis, is we get too stuck on every single scenario versus trying to find the key scenario. If I am someone in a product group that needs to share PowerPoints with customers or reports with customers, turn it on for them, right? Like, let's find find a use case in your org and then use that and build from there. And OneDrive will be where you start. It's usually I want to allow these files for these people to share in OneDrive. Great. That's how you move. And then when you start with that, you figure out what policies you need to have in place. How are we going to control guest access when people come in? What do we do for expiration? What is our approval for domains? Like, those all end up with scenarios that you solve by figuring out at least a single use case. It's very hard to say we're going to enable all of Microsoft to share in OneDrive. In my organization, one large consulting company, we don't do that. You can't. There's risk of sensitive data loss everywhere. So identifying where your sensitive data is, but really focusing in on a single use case and using that as your gateway is how you can be successful.
I like the notions that I know about OneDrive, and I'm hearing you and how you would describe it to them is almost playing it back of, well, how would you do it otherwise? Not to say that there aren't other technologies like OneDrive that they could adopt and, accomplish similar. But if they have Microsoft 365 and they've got content in OneDrive, to not enable external sharing means you have to put something that you want to share somewhere that, like you said, might be an email attachment. Oh, it just freaks me out. Or it might be on somebody else's platform so that they can access it from there versus you contain control. Share the file is an action that you take. Unsharing the file is something you can do very easily. And from an admin perspective, you could do that at scale and turn off guest sharing, in certain places. And
when you get into, it's a really interesting point. When you have been working more in the security and compliance space with organizations, and so external sharing has been probably the top, outside of some classification work, like the top question of how can we do this in our organization. And it's a key thing to think about is if you go look in the compliance portal or in the Purview portal and you pull up Compliance Manager and you pull up a data protection baseline or some of the NIST framework controls, they recommend external sharing. Like you will actually be knocked down in your percentage score if you turn external sharing off because, to your example, you use other avenues which will allow data exfiltration in other ways. And I love starting this conversation with, if I do I'm talking about OneDrive this week and I'll say, do you have external sharing turned on? And 3 people will raise their hand and I'll say, what everyone has email. So you're not more secure by keeping it off.
It's like the scene in Jurassic Park when they come to the realization that life finds a way, files find a way, always. And if they go around the boundaries of what IT has control over, that's more freaky than, a feature that, just needs a little bit of training and user knowledge of how to use. And you control it on or off. If you try it and it doesn't work for any real reason, not perception, but a real access issue or something.
Yeah, I love thinking of that main theme of it's okay to try. I see too many people getting stuck, and I know I want to talk about some sync here, but you have to jump. You have to try. You have to test. Do it in a way that's safe and secure for your organization, but it's okay to try and roll back if you need to. We roll out, primarily when we roll out OneDrive, and this especially in external sharing, we pilot everything. You never turn it on for all. You pilot it, you test it, you get feedback. That's a standard process that you should follow.
That's why it's called OneDrive. You just get one person to drive, and then everybody can drive. So you've said compliance a couple of times. I do want to talk about sync as well, and I'm going to see if I can do my best to kind of marry them in a prompt for you to, I think, provide information about sync deployment and some tips and tricks. But also, there's the feature that I always think of as a sync feature that's real specific to a type of compliance for the desktop, which is the KFM feature, known folder move. Do you mind just riffing for a little bit around sync and KFM and overall how a good sync deployment helps better compliance, better, any concerns people have about where content lives, even if it feels like now it lives in more places because it's not just on the service, it's on desktops?
Yeah, a great one there is what happens when someone leaves. I think that's a key trigger when we look at OneDrive and we look at sync and we look at compliance is how do we manage the user lifecycle? And I think the user lifecycle or the employee lifecycle is very similar to your device lifecycle. That what I like to see I'll take it back up. So make sure we understand what known folder move is. So known folder move is the ability to take your existing, what's considered Windows known folder, so your documents folder, your desktop folder, your pictures folder. They're the folders that everyone works with every day without you even knowing. Every time you save a file in Word, it will save it to documents unless you do something differently. So for a user experience side, what KFM allows us to do is I can pull up my laptop, I can click and I can enable KFM, and all my files will be, for those 3 folders, will automatically be saved to OneDrive versus my local machine. Well, they're saved to my local machine and synced up, but technically it allows my files to be in the cloud in a way that I work in context that I'm used to. So I don't have to think of, I need to go save my file to OneDrive. Or what I love to say is, a great way to start with OneDrive is always create your content in the cloud first. If you start in the cloud first, you have autosave capabilities, you have collaboration capabilities. And without KFM, you'd have to go to your OneDrive folder or go to the web and create that. If I'm with known folder move, I go create a new folder in my documents, it will automatically be in OneDrive within a second. So I get that full cloud capability without having to change the way that I work. And a true story for why I think it's a necessary, I try to push everyone as a requirement to get it, is what happens when things happen to your machine? What happens to your files? I was with a customer, I think it was last year, and I had my laptop I think it was an early morning meeting, and the laptop was a little tired and thought it needed a large glass of coffee. So it drank that coffee all over, and there were things that happened that were very bright, and the machine didn't turn on anymore. It was gone. It woke up and it was past. So, and I was working with a customer, and I was like, I was not by anyone. I'm like, I was traveling, like, this is not going to go well. But because I had KFM and OneDrive completely set up, I was able to actually grab a loaner PC from that customer, log right in, pull up my browser. I had lost nothing. I was in the middle of a PowerPoint that was automatically saved. It was right into OneDrive in my documents. I just pulled that PowerPoint right back up, and I could keep going. Like, the ability to have that always be in the cloud without the user knowing as an administrator gives you full control of sensitive data. So there's usually a concern of, where is my sensitive data on my machine? Do I have PII? Do I have customer information that when I leave should be a record, should be not be exfiltrated? If I have KFM set up, I'm working on my content, that content's getting sent into the M365, scanned, indexed, searchable, e-discovery, pick your Protoviti solution, it benefits from it. And the user doesn't even know, and they get the benefits of the cloud. So it just naturally helps from an administrative standpoint, and the user without really knowing, I think is a great way.
Even if they do know, it's without disruption. So there's no tax on having that feature turned on. And the only benefit is better compliance for IT and actual better access, which I think gets back to even the add to OneDrive, that better access across devices. Add to OneDrive sort of makes it available for all computers and devices that you access, not just the one that you chose to sync. So I've always really liked KFM. And to be honest, when the feature first came out, I thought we were starting a podcast because I didn't know what the feature they were talking about. They just kept referring to it as KFM, and they didn't ever say what it meant. And so I thought, are we doing a radio station, or is it KFM? Or I don't know what. But then once I learned it, it's really folder backup. Maybe backup is a strong word for what we're doing. But the feature itself is really key, especially if you've been leveraging those folders as a memory muscle where I put things. Now you can still put them there, but they're in a better place.
So it is, yes. I think we can talk about how beneficial it is, but on the administrative side, the actual deployment of it has some red flags. Right? This is not one that you can, depending on what you have set up in your environment today, it can be a very complicated enablement process, especially if you have machines that are doing things like folder redirection, if you have other backup solutions you're working on your C drive. If one customer I've been working with recently we really didn't want to bring a lot of that data, so they'd use their C drive for junk. And we thought, if we turn this on, we truly don't know what would happen. So let's say you had sensitive data in there. We have DOP policies to go quarantine data if it has, let's say PII, for example, that you're not supposed to have PII. You could turn that on, and we could automatically trigger 1 million alerts for all we know. Or we could copy data up into the cloud that we don't want to because it doesn't follow our records policy for personal data. And if you have that's just the data living there because you don't know what's going to come up. The huge scenario I run into, or the biggest one for complication, is if you already have folder redirection in place through Windows. So if I'm already redirecting my documents folder to a network share, which is a great practice, been doing it for years. So on the server administrative side, I used to do that all the time because it was a better practice. So my files were always stored in the network. So my example of my laptop breaking, I would be able to get it back on the network share. And that was good, but what's very hard is the timing of decoupling that, right? So if we had KFM, if we wanted to deploy KFM and we had folder redirection enabled, and I just turned on KFM, your C drive documents folder is actually empty, right? There's actually nothing there. So you have to ensure you understand what's happening on your My Documents desktop and pictures folder today to see what you need to do before you enable KFM. And then when you enable KFM, this is one, going back to the pilot, be very aware of how you deploy it because it will take time. So a good example is, what is success, right? You ask, what is a successful sync? it might take weeks. I could say, I want every machine to have KFM enabled with files on demand enabled and all of my Intune policies or admin templates deployed.
Want that bell, that whistle, and maybe 2 whistles.
And done. But to do that, there's really a tough way to track that, because what you really, you turn something on and you wait. You're then dependent on that user. If they don't log in for a week, if they're not connected to the network, if they don't have an access to Intune, you have to just wait. And for your testing, you really need to make sure when you're deploying KFM, you understand what that lag time is, what happens in between that, especially if I'm removing something before I turn it on. Maybe I want to do a backup or do a scan first. Like, I've seen these be packaged as almost deployments. Like, I'm on a Monday, you log in, we're going to tell you it's going to be enabled, but give you 2 weeks for it to be set up. And then I come back and check reports, right? I can't check reports on Tuesday and say, did it work? Well, I don't know. I need to wait. So as an admin, when I'm deploying KFM, I want to make it a requirement very similar to how I want to make external sharing a requirement. But my efforts as an admin spend more time in analyzing what's out there today with saying, here's your ideal sync state and the configuration and this button and that button, and have those set. But what is the steps to get from your C drive being redirected to some network share to having this Intune policy deployed across your device suite? And that is where it takes time to figure out what that will be and then test and pilot that out effectively. So you don't have, there is a chance for data loss, right? I mean, when you do this, there is a absolute chance by enabling KFM that stuff could, if you're in the middle of working on a file, if you have redirection, there's a concept called offline files, which can be very challenging to recover. So be aware of those as you're moving through is a huge step in the user life, the deployment lifecycle of OneDrive. That if you inherit it, is KFM on today? If not, how do I get there?
And if we stay with the words of caution, and certainly best practices of how to get from A to not B, but maybe A to D for enabling something, I'm always fascinated, especially if they are or have been for a while an Office 365 customer or Microsoft 365, however they've purchased it. There's always some customers that you come across that haven't yet deployed OneDrive or haven't yet deployed at scale. And that may be some of the things that you've already talked about. But are there anything, as you either are talking them off the ledge or at least planning to deploy it in the right way, that are more perception blockers in how you treat them? If there's anything that you can share.
Yeah, so let's take a recent scenario that I've had where an organization did not want to deploy OneDrive yet. And their scenario was around the existing capability of another application, right? So a perceived usage, where if you're using another application for, a great way to think of this is personal file management. If I'm working why would I want to give my user multiple places for personal file management? How do I know what's real? So when you think about that, like a key blocker I see is solution distribution. And then how am I going to migrate? Am I going to disable? Do I keep OneDrive off while I have this other application running? Like, that would be a scenario where we say, great, but look at what you're doing there. If we want to enable KFM and get this true sync, we need to get the content from that application or remove content back into OneDrive. And that is a stopper for some folks to say, I don't want to do that yet. I'm scared to move my content. I don't know what's going to be there. So I see this, if you have other personal file shares, like, what are the steps to still use OneDrive? It's okay to have both. Right? I think I talked about not being scared to enable external sharing. Don't be scared to enable OneDrive because you have something else there too. Or don't be scared to enable OneDrive on the web and not sync. It's okay. One unique one that I've had was in a financial services area that they were holding off on OneDrive because they were nervous about internal sharing. And they even asked, like, Drew, can I turn off internal sharing in OneDrive?
Isn't that just sharing?
And I was like, that's just sharing. And no, but let's talk. So they were nervous about enabling it fully because they were going to sync KFM and say, well, people couldn't share off of their C drive today. What if they do it in OneDrive? And it was like, well, actually they can. They just email it, right? It's not like you're actually just because we enable OneDrive and we enable sharing, you can't turn it off. You don't want to turn it off. They're going to your Jurassic Park reference. They're going to find a way, whether it's another tool, whether it's their C drive today. Like, don't let like the idea of data will move inside my organization as a blocker, because I've had that again be very recent. You don't need to wait as much. I think if you look very specifically at what else could be the blocker, I think a device readiness is a core one, where you can enable the web but not turn on the sync client yet, because you might have, maybe you want to wait until we move fully to Win 11 because you don't trust I have some where they've had machines that haven't checked in, and especially actually this is another true scenario where machines haven't checked in since post the pandemic, where they haven't come to the office. So that machine hasn't physically checked in over 3 years. And we are not going to deploy the OneDrive sync client to that because that machine is technically not compliant yet. So we stopped them, and their blocker right now is until we get, we're going to wait until their device lifecycle rolls up. So they're going to get Win 11, and we're going to launch it all together as a great M365 platform. Like that is a true scenario of, I wouldn't recommend doing that to that machine either. But they can work on the web, right? We'll give them web, that we're not stopping them, but we'll deploy the sync client because we can't trust that device yet until we get a little more connectivity to it.
I always think it's interesting that the majority of feature innovation that you see is on the web. You know, the majority of the work that you might do is in other applications, and then you store through OneDrive. But it's really interesting to think of an individual or a company that is OneDrive web only. Totally functional, totally get it. For me, I couldn't live without sync because I have multiple machines. It used to be where a lot of times I'd have my work machine at work, was a laptop, but I would just leave it there. And then I would come home and I would just have a matching set of files, because they are the same files, synced to my home machine, all within the domain. So I was connected to the network and managed and all of that stuff. But I couldn't live without it, even though I could sign into the web a couple places. I just, I'm used to it being a folder that I know where to go to.
And I think maybe coming back to what admin's point of view would be is you truly need to understand your device estate. I think people are handed the keys to OneDrive and SharePoint, and they say, good luck. And you might come from an application background. You got to go learn about Windows and Mac OS and mobile and iOS and Android. You need to have an understanding of that, because that is where people will be working with their files. To your point, it's not web. Web is easily controlled. My administrative work in OneDrive, or my advice, is always around the devices and the syncing and the client, and how are files moving. Once they're in OneDrive, once they're in the web and you're in the cloud, great. There's not administrative activities there. It just works. The administrative activities for that would probably be, again, back to when an employee leaves, but that's not web specific. It's all about the content. It's about how people are getting to that content and what are they doing. If we enable a sync client, you're enabling someone to download files, whether maliciously or on purpose. And you need to know, as a OneDrive admin, how you can control that. Like, you might not be the one making the decision on what the controls are, but you need to have the awareness of what is capable and what's happening in your org today to say, yes, I do have 100 Mac devices and I have no idea what's happening. Let's figure out how to make that work. Or, yes, I have Androids controlled and we're going to deploy the OneDrive app, but I don't want you to be able to copy data from OneDrive to your local device. All of that is, in my opinion, part of your OneDrive administrative understanding. And then once it's on, how do you, I think to kind of go on this last part is monitoring. Like, when I've enabled, so let's say I've turned on KFM. In your example, I've come home, I've worked with my content, I've synced this appropriately. It's a wonderful KFM setup. I feel like I'm secure, but what if I start to get that wonderful red X, a little wonderful red exclamation point? And how do I know what's actually happening? Or maybe I turn on KFM and you were at home that day and you get this little red exclamation point. The administrative side of monitoring is we can see lots. We can see when syncs happen. Are the syncs successful? Is KFM enabled? What devices users are on? And you can actually be proactive in triaging and understanding the usage of OneDrive using those reports. Or if you ever need to investigate if something does go wrong, or if something, let's say, maliciously happens, you have, like, as a OneDrive admin, you can go in and see that information too. Did Mark sync that before he left?
Can you read my mind and know what I'm thinking about?
Not yet. I think that comes with Copilot V2.
Okay. If you're not at 365 EduCon, where can people see what you're up to, get a hold of you, you and your company?
Yeah, so I work for a company called Protoviti right now. So the best way to get a hold of me is through my email there or through my Twitter. So my Twitter is at dmadelung, DMADELUNG, and that will be where I'm most active. And I know we'll probably put my email up in different locations, but that would be the best route to get a hold of me. If you want to talk any more about OneDrive, or I love always hearing some of the stories that people have for, especially in OneDrive sync deployment. I have a session I'm all about OneDrive administration this week, and I use a lot of those stories in these scenarios of what is true life, right? I think we can talk about an ideal sync state all day and say, here's the 5 things we want to enable. But to get to those 5 things, there is sometimes a mountain to climb to get there. And I've definitely spent a lot of time with organizations to figure out how to scale that mountain and get back down to the other side. So definitely email and social media are my 2 kind of core ways to get a hold of me if you want to continue this or talk about Wisconsin sports or golf.
Well, thank you for your time here at the show. I hope you have a great rest of the show, but also thanks for your time on the IntraZone.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Just like I sat down and had a really great chat with Drew that you just heard, I hope you enjoyed it. He's a really great resource for all things OneDrive. He's also just a great guy. And if you love golfing and you ever see Drew, make sure to ask how his golf game is going. But because it was at an event where I grabbed time with Drew, as you might with Drew in the future if you hunt him down at the next event that he'll be at, we wanted to turn and talk about some of the upcoming events going forward in 2024. The first one that I have eyeballs on, February 9th to the 10th, near Hamburg in Germany, Collab Days Bremen 2024. Always great to see the Collab Days across the year. If you're in Germany, you've got a great event close by, near Hamburg, February 9th through the 10th. Also, February 10th, back in the United States in Reston, Virginia, is M365 Saturday DC. Sort of warmed my heart that they were still using the X Products Saturday moniker. Still am looking for the next SharePoint Saturday. I know those maybe are more in the past. But anyway, the M365 Saturday DC, February 10th in Reston, Virginia. On its heels later in February 21, is Teams Nation 2024. This is a big online event, of course, about Microsoft Teams, and you'll get a whole bunch of sessions about Teams from all different angles, from chat to meetings, mesh, overview, things from Microsoft, a lot from the community and MVPs. If you like Microsoft Teams or are interested in what's coming next or how to deploy it properly or what should I do, I have no clue, Teams Nation 2024 on February 21st. February 24th is another Collab Days in Calgary, not too far from where I'm sitting, just a little north and a little bit to the east. Always great, again, to see Collab Days spanning the globe. Going from the one I mentioned earlier in Bremen, now another Collab Days in Calgary on February 24th. Skipping ahead into March 26th through the 28th in Las Vegas, there will be, for the very first time, the Microsoft Fabric Community Conference. There are a lot of things in this conference I don't even pretend to know about, but if you know who Jason Himmelstein is, you know Power BI, you know Microsoft Fabric, you love data and you love managing and getting reports and dashboards and all of those good things. It's really a first of its kind from a conference perspective. You'll hear and see a lot of the folks that you're familiar with if you've been to previous conferences that certainly have elements of the Power Platform or SQL or all those good things rolled up into one. The Microsoft Fabric Community Conference, March 26th to 28th in Las Vegas, Nevada. In April 3rd to the 5th in San Antonio, Texas is the AIM conference. If you like content management, if you're into content services, if you're on this wave of content AI, then AIM is a great place to go to listen to a lot of experts who are looking at it from an industry perspective. What are all of these vendors offering? We certainly have a stake in that show with our friend and my co-host Chris McNulty and his team representing what we're doing with SharePoint Premium, previously Microsoft Syntex, and all the goodness of the content services underpinning a lot of what you do in SharePoint or with content throughout Microsoft 365. It's a great place to go to get perspectives on the industry, and certainly a great time to go meet with our content management team. April 9th through the 11th in Dallas, Texas is the North American Cloud and Collaboration Summit. This is NACS, previously in Branson, Missouri, now moving to Dallas, Texas. And the fun note on this one, besides being a great community collaboration offering with great speakers, a lot of great community attendees, and of course MVPs in multitude, is that it is a offer for training and insights on multiple cloud vendors. This is not just a Microsoft show, although there will be a lot of content on Microsoft 365 and the Power Platform and all the portfolio that we offer. But it's also a place if you want to go get information about Salesforce and Amazon and Google. And I think that sounds like a very fun expo hall. I hope that there isn't any fighting that breaks out. Mark Rackley, I'm holding you responsible if any of the Microsoft or Microsoft MVPs or community folks who are diehard in Microsoft get injured. I'll send you a packet of bacon if everybody comes out unscathed. Now, the last conference that I wanted to talk about is a big one that Microsoft is leaning into. It's the Microsoft 365 Community Conference. This is April 28th through May 2nd. There are also pre and post days for workshops. And this year it'll be in Orlando, Florida. We are doing a lot of planning at this moment. We will have a keynote with Jeff Teeper and crew covering a lot of aspects of Microsoft, especially around SharePoint, OneDrive, what we're doing with Copilot and AI, and of course representation coming from Office and Teams and Windows. And there's a lot being planned for the keynote that then will articulate a lot of what it is that we're planning to do with breakout sessions, lightning talks, one-on-one meetings. We'll have a booth. We hope to see you there. Please stop by. And the little inside baseball that I can share is that the planning is going really well. We'll have somewhere in the range of 60 to 80 sessions Microsoft-led. Those will be incorporating voices from customers and partners, product leaders. It's really fun to currently see a lot of the executives and the product teams that are signing up to join in, certainly to be there to share what it is that they have to share about their products and also to listen and engage with the community. So the Microsoft 365 Community Conference, April 28th through May 2nd, those are the main days, 2 pre-days and 1 post-day for workshops. You can go to aka.ms/M365conf24. It will take you to their website. You can see all of what's posted. I will just tell you there's a lot more coming in terms of sessions, speakers. There's a lot more things that site will have now and going forward so that you can make the best decision and hopefully join us in Orlando, Florida. Now, beyond events, we here at the IntraZone love staying connected year-round through talking with you and hearing your feedback that you send us in a lot of different ways on Twitter and coming in on email. But hey, there are a number of great podcasts produced by Microsoft across the portfolio, not just about SharePoint, but pretty much about everything under the sun. And we have a link to help you discover and follow ones that you like. If you go to aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts, you'll see a list of all that we've been tracking, and hopefully you find a lot of good things to join you on your next walk, your next drive into the city, or your next travel on the plane when you're ready to get into quiet mode. We want to thank our guest, Drew Madelung, for being on the show and for sharing all things OneDrive that drives clarity for admins, and we hope drove clarity for you on today's pod. Check out our show page for links to all that was discussed today and more. Go to aka.ms/theinterzone. And you can send us questions and feedback for the SharePoint teams. You can reach us via email at theintrozone@microsoft.com or via Twitter at SharePoint, at mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000. Remember to rate and review and tell all your friends about the show. Go to the tip top of some mountain, some building, into your backyard, and let everybody know what you think about the show. Encourage them to listen, subscribe, and we hope then follow the show. And of course, we encourage you to do that wherever you get your favorite tech podcasts. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Mark Cashman. This has been The Introzone, a show about the Microsoft 365 one driving and thriving intelligent intranet.